subscribe.
First Secret History reveals why these guys were hard to catch on the Costa del Crime.
This is the story of how a gangster's paradise was created in the heart of Europe. For a short period of time, Spain was a place where British criminals could escape the law and live out their dreams.
Well, I woke one day and I looked around at a drab existence in a drab old town. Saw my years going down the drain, I thought I'd rob a bank, moved to Spain. Saw my house and my getaway car, bought a villa and a pool and a Spanish guitar. Settled down in that Spanish way, sunshine light when you hear them say, ole, 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 ole.
It was buzzing, it was just like, I don't know, it was like being on a Hollywood film set all the time. It wasn't real.
Just all the glitz and glamour you'd expect of a place which has a huge amount of very, very dodgy money.
I loved them days. There's no way I could say I didn't. I loved them. And to think about them now, it's still lovely.
These criminals acquired an aura of glamour. Wanted men became celebrities. It was the stuff of legend. But behind the popular image of crooks on the run in the sun was a darker, more violent reality. Paradise was never quite what it seemed.
Welcome to Malaga Airport. You've just arrived on the Costa del Sol, a very special part of southern Europe and one of Spain's best-known vacation areas.
The 1970s was a decade of boom on the Costa del Sol. Every year, 2 million British tourists were visiting southern Spain, enjoying the benefits of cheap package holidays in the sun. But while Spain was becoming Britain's favourite holiday destination, diplomatic relations between the two countries had collapsed. The source of the problem was Gibraltar, one of the last outposts of the British Empire. The Spanish had always resented having a foreign colony on their doorstep, and throughout the 70s had tried to force the British to hand it back. In 1978, they provoked a diplomatic crisis by refusing to renew the extradition treaty they had with Britain. For the first time in 100 years, they stopped sending back suspected British criminals living in Spain. And so began an extraordinary period in European history. The south of Spain became known as the place to do a runner, and for 5 years a steady flow of British criminals arrived, largely unnoticed. It would take a major armed robbery in London to turn the Costa del Sol into the Costa del Crime.
It's still not known exactly how much money was taken. The first estimates were at about £1 million. Since then, I've heard from reliable sources that it could be as much as £6 million. Inquiries are continuing inside the building. Members of staff are still helping the police. So far, it seems they've got little to go on.
On Easter Monday 1983, a gang of armed robbers took control of the Security Express depot near the City of London. They held the guards hostage and forced their way into the vault. They stole £6 million in used notes.
The raid was praised for its military precision.
It was the largest cash robbery in British history.
One theory is that the gang climbed in...
And it made headline news. The robbers were described as a gang of evil men.
As all the staff came in, they was all cop fire as they came through the security and into the main building. And they was just made comfortable.
One of the guards was subjected to an absolutely terrifying ordeal by having petrol poured on him and having matches rattled in his ear. And he was in no doubt whatsoever that if he didn't cooperate, he was going to be set on fire.
That was the threat, that he would be set alight, but because he wouldn't give the right numbers to the combination to the vault.
At the time, Freddie Foreman was a big player in the London underworld. The Krays knew him as the Undertaker, and he had served time in prison for disposing of the body of one of their victims. But his name would become forever linked with the Security Express robbery. The same is true of Ronnie Knight. He owned a couple of clubs in Soho, but was better known as the husband of Barbara Windsor. Knight has always denied being in the Security Express gang, but his brother John was one of the ringleaders. He was using Ronnie to take money out of the country.
Johnny phoned me up and he said to me, are you on your own? I said, yes. He said, can I come over then? I said, yes. And he come over and he had the suitcase with him. He said, would you take this over to Spain? So I said, what is it? He said, it's money. And he told me where it was from. So I said, good luck, boy. Lovely. I'll get it over there for you.
Within days, cash from the robbery was being transferred out of Britain, destined for Spain. The Costa del Sol was known as an easy place to launder dirty money. A mass of hotels, apartments and villas were being built along the coast, and no one asked too many questions about how they were financed. Members of the gang made frequent trips to Spain, investing heavily in property, moving back and forth with ease. For 9 months, the police had no idea where the Security Express money had gone. A team of flying squad officers was dedicated to the case, but was making little progress in solving Britain's largest cash robbery.
The powers that be at Scotland Yard were under considerable pressure, both from the media and political circles, to get a result, as it's known, and this obviously filtered down to the troops on the ground. One or two of my colleagues expressed the idea that we should be rattling cages, which is an old expression for stirring the murky waters of the London underworld and see what raises its head.
They rattled and rattled, carrying out surveillance operations, leaning on informants, until finally one of the gang turned supergrass and named names. John Knight was identified as the mastermind behind the robbery, and in January 1984, the police arrested him at his house outside London. They found a crucial piece of evidence, a photograph that showed Knight and the rest of the gang celebrating in Spain.
That barbecue party, and when the photo was taken, was 2 months after the robbery. That was the first time we'd met each other after the event.
Alongside Freddie Foreman were 2 other underworld faces, Ron Everett and John Mason. Alongside them, Ronnie Knight and his brother John.
If you see the photo today, you see John, he's got a hat on and he's just looking around over someone's shoulder. He's not putting his face on the show too much, but everyone else is, you know. And it was a bad mistake to take that photograph.
The discovery of the photo put Foreman and the others on the wanted list for the robbery. Realizing they were now in the frame, they decided to settle in Spain. The British police knew who they were and where they were, but without an extradition treaty, were powerless to bring them home.
It seemed incredible to us that people could just move from one part of Europe to another and be totally out of our jurisdiction, and we were unable to do anything about it.
The Security Express suspects merged into the existing community of British criminals. No one, except the police, knew much about them. Until one day, 15 months after the robbery, a Spanish news magazine, Tiempo, blew their cover. They called it the crime of the century. A Spanish official had passed on a secret police dossier, and Tiempo was able for the first time to name the Security Express suspects and reveal they were living openly on the Costa del Sol. Within hours, the British press were onto the story, but they were focused on one man, tabloid favourite Ronnie Knight.
I was so used to my name being in the papers. I mean, it was in the papers when I met Barbara Windsor. You get used to it. When you become a star, you get used to these things, don't you?
But the press realised Knight was in Spain with a new girl on his arm. Sue Haylock, a barmaid from one of his clubs.
Ronnie Knight was from Central Casting. He was a good-looking guy, he was articulate, and he also had with him this sexy lady. He chose her over Barbara, the fantasy of every red-blooded British male. So what the hell has this girl got if Ronnie is going to carry on Barbara? And so it was manna from heaven, and the great British public couldn't get enough of it.
In July 1984, a new phrase entered the English language: the Costa del Crime. A legend was born, which would fascinate the public and frustrate the authorities for the next decade. The early 80s were difficult times in Britain. There were 3 million people on the dole, and the news was dominated by stories of strikes and riots. By contrast, stories of life on the Costa del Crime offered escapism. Vivid tales of runaway crooks living it up in sun-kissed villas. Ronnie Knight, wanted in connection with the Security Express robbery, was the star name. And his villa became the focal point of the entire press story.
It's all changed completely now. You couldn't get any further than here because there were big gates with an intercom. And now he's been smashed and lying on the floor there, and this is where we used to come to see if we could ever get an interview with him. On occasions you could, on occasions you couldn't. But there was, it was like, you know, Ronnie Knight was behind bars, if you like, in his own house.
Could you get out of the way, please?
If you could get any quote of any sort, and certainly if the photographers could get the latest picture of Ronnie and Sue and all that, it made your day.
It was terrible. It was terrible. I just couldn't walk out that without them being there. I couldn't go and have something to eat without them being there. As you pulled out the car, there they was. They had the cameras over the top of the car. Got you now, Ronnie. Come on, you want to talk to us now? And off I went.
Ronnie Knight represented the idea of the villain on the run having fun in the sun. It was poor old Ronnie who symbolised exactly what the Costa del Crime was all about.
People they've got to have a weekly fix of it, update on the Costa del Crime, what's going on, and it was fascinating. And the tabloids, of course, many of which I represented, provided the service. It was a real-life soap in a way, you know, EastEnders on the Costa del Crime.
And where the tabloids led, television followed. Into town rode the scourge of all crooks.
My wife was out sunning herself on the terrace one day. I was listening to some music and I had the earphones on. And all of a sudden, Moyne's crawling on her hands and knees across the marble floor. And I thought, what's the matter? What's going on here? You know, what's he cracked up or something, you know? And she's going like this. And outside the windows, in a helicopter. And that's him, Roger Cook.
Freddie Foreman lives in the top apartment of this exclusive block. Ronnie Knight doesn't like journalists at the best of times, but we decided to call on him anyway.
He wasn't liked at all, Cookie. He tried to get everybody, but he never spoke to anyone. The only thing I've ever seen him with Cliff.
Irrespective of where
Clifford Sachs was another suspect in the Security Express case. He had owned the pub in London where the robbery was planned and had been living in Spain ever since.
Sachs became threatening and abusive. As a result, he was thrown out of the bar by the owner.
You stay in there and pack it up.
And Cookie tried to talk to him, and Cliff went haywire and threw an ashtray at him, you know. But he missed him, unfortunately.
No, seriously, that's all we...
Stop it!
This was the first ever Cook report, watched by 10 million viewers on primetime television.
Police in the United Kingdom think there are at least 100 fugitives along the coast.
The Costa del Crime had become a serious journalistic story.
It's known that some of the stolen money was transferred to Spain, but police have been able to trace just...
When approached again, he sped off.
Television reporters expressed a sense of public outrage that so little was being done to bring notorious criminals to justice.
Why are you locking yourself inside your villa? British police believe a new extradition agreement might end the lifestyles of some men living in popular holiday areas.
As a result of the publicity, and after intense diplomacy, Spain agreed to reintroduce extradition in 1985 and effectively closed the door on any new British criminals. But the extradition law wasn't retrospective. It didn't cover anyone who had arrived in Spain before 1985. There were at least 100 wanted men on the Costa del Sol who still couldn't be touched. Among them were the Security Express suspects. British police officers were able to visit Spain, but couldn't make arrests. All they could do was gather evidence.
Over the last fortnight, 2 detective constables have been using this hotel as a base to keep a close watch on the luxury lifestyle of 5 men from the East End of London.
I went to Spain with a colleague to investigate various bank accounts, property transactions, transfers of money in and out of the country. We managed to establish that one of our suspects held a safety deposit box in one of the local banks. After a delay of 3 days, we got permission from the local court to have this opened. But of course, by that time, the cupboard was bare.
I mean, you knew everything that they was up to out there, and because they was, as soon as you'd probably get a warning before they went in the bank, they'd come in and say they're coming back the next day, and you would be told that they were coming back the next day, you know? Where did you get the warning from? Well, from the bank itself. Well, somebody in the bank would give you a ring and tell you. Of course, when they was going to safe deposit boxes and things, they got there, they was empty. There was nothing in them, was there?
In a small fit of frustration one day, and over a glass of beer, I actually prodded one of the Spanish detectives in the chest. I was trying to explain to him our need to get a move on. He just looked me in the eye, and I noticed that he pushed his jacket back with one hand, and of course sitting on his hip was his pistol, and he wasn't at all impressed. The Spanish attitude was that if these people were behaving themselves, they weren't really that interested.
Every Sunday, the place to be seen was Mel's Beach Bar. Mel Williams was a friend of the Costa crooks, their entertainer.
It was party time. It was big party. We're talking about a place that would normally be holding sort of 100 people, became 1,000 people on the beach. And then we'd see people turn up that normally weren't dressed for the beach. You know, we wondered, well, hello, who's that over there, you know, with a suit and boot, you know. The chaps would all be together. They'd move en masse. And so if they found that they liked a certain place, a certain restaurant, or a certain musician, then that was it, you're in. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, you know, and so did everybody else that came down, you know. Lots of champagne, lots of lobster thermidor, oysters, whatever you wanted. That was the 80s.
There was a guy we used to go out to dinner with, and we took your parents out to dinner with.
Right, my mummy and daddy. Mummy and daddy. And it was really funny because at the end of the dinner, he kind of shooed us off and said to my mother and father, Mummy and Daddy, you come in the Rolls Royce with me. I saw my parents driving down the port in the Rolls Royce. So when we met up with them later, my father said, oh, what a nice man. I said, yeah. Actually, Dad, I said, he's wanted for murder. It didn't matter, he thought it was dinner. It really didn't matter. Mind you, we never went to dinner on our own with him, did we? There was always a few of us.
I do remember one night sitting in a bar. It was about sort of 8 people, and it just, I don't know why, somebody started the conversation. Well, no, how long you done, you know? The first guy was sort of 10 stretch, and then 5 stretch, and I did a 2, and then the next guy was 15, and the next guy was 8. And it went right round about how many years people had been away, and then it came to me, and it was like, I did one night in Mallorca for being drunk and disorderly, and I've never seen 8 people laugh so much in their lives. One night.
The heyday of the Costa del crime came in June 1987, when Ronnie Knight decided to get married.
The last time I played that was probably on this very piano in the Club Oceana here in Marbella, and it was the time of the wedding of the year, or the wedding of the decade. You know, it really looked fantastic, like a lot of money being spent. And Ronnie and Sue were, you know, beautifully decked out, all in white. And a lot of people came from London, East End of London. It was actually a gathering of the clans. There was a lot of nice silk suits and mohair suits, and a lot of people dressed up, and everybody was very respectful to each other, as one does when one meets the clan.
Let there be you. Although Knight was a wanted man, he made no attempt to tie the knot in secret.
There was a lot of people there, yeah. I knew a lot of people at clubs, didn't I? Everyone went to Spain for an holiday. So, if they was there and I was getting married, that was it, they all come. Well, I like to see the old faces, I've not seen them for years.
It was a classic, sticking 2 fingers up at the rest of the world, you know. It was a parade of villains coming down the road here, and just weaving their way into the El Oceano. Freddie Foreman turned up with his son James. I said, Mr. Foreman, and he goes like, how do you know who I am, and all that.
Let there be love. Well, what can you do? You've had all this publicity. You've been spread across every newspaper in the country. You've had TV and magazines. So why not fucking go to the wedding? Why not go there? I mean, what? Be rude not to, wouldn't it? Who cares?
The wedding party was being photographed by the British police and the British press. The guests knew they were being watched, but carried on regardless. The crooks on the Costa believed they were untouchable. They thought the good times would never end. The stories of British crooks on the run became part of folklore.
Ronald Knight, alias Ronnie, se le acusa de pertenecer a banda armada y de participar en el robo al Security Express.
The media in both Spain and England continue to focus on the old-style robbers.
Bella de Marbella, amplios antecedentes en Gran Bretaña. Freddie Foreman vive en la organización La Alcazaba.
But the popular image glossed over a darker truth. The high life in Spain had attracted other criminals, and as their cash ran out, there was the temptation of yet more easy money from drugs. The Costa del Sol is only a short boat ride from Morocco, and during the 60s and 70s, the journey became an established part of the hippie trail. It also became a route for smuggling cannabis.
I was a small-time smuggler then. Small-time smugglers would come to Spain to buy marijuana and hash when it became available, and would make about 2 to 3 times their money taking it from Spain to England. So it was quite an economical journey or something like that. But I was talking about very, very small amounts, handfuls of kilos.
But the drug trade between Morocco and Spain would be transformed by events thousands of miles away. In the late 70s and early 80s, the Middle East was collapsing into violence. It became impossible to move drugs through the main established routes.
People who up to then had been supplied by Lebanon and Pakistan thought they would open up a similar base in Morocco. And so Pakistani and Lebanese experts were called in to Morocco, and hash was produced.
Within a short period of time, Morocco became the world's major supplier of hashish. And the Costa del Sol became the entry point for drugs coming into Europe. By coincidence, British crooks were arriving in Spain at exactly the same time. They saw a chance to move in and take over the business.
Some people who were armed robbers, burglars, major criminals of all types suddenly realized, look guys, here's something we can do without getting our fingers dirty and make an awful lot of money in the process. So these people got involved in the shipment and the major distribution and just sat back and watched the money roll in.
They sort of brought in, I suppose, some of the criminal ethics which therefore made the business more profitable, i.e. not grassing people up and shutting a few mouths up, as they would often put it, or ensuring the debts were paid. A certain efficiency was sort of brought into the business, which was actually welcomed. Deals went up to 5 or 10 tons. Containers were being used rather than cars or suitcases or anything like that. At a guess, but quite a reasoned guess, by the early 80s it'd be about at least 500 tons a year of Moroccan coming into England.
A large percentage of the drugs that we were talking about were coming through Spain, and they were coming through connections to UK criminals, and the connections were the Costa del crime expatriates. So there's no doubt about that.
There were people involved in drugs. It's no good denying it or saying there wasn't. But the majority of people, well, it's a bit of puff.
By the late 80s, a bit of puff had become a multi-million-pound illegal business, and the Costa crooks had become drug barons. For years, the Spanish police had tolerated their presence as long as they stayed out of trouble. But with the Costa becoming a center of criminal activity, official attitudes changed, and the Spanish police launched a crackdown. One by one, British criminals were arrested and started serving time in Spanish prisons. But the highest profile target was Freddie Foreman. The Spanish couldn't extradite him back to Britain, but they could choose to deport him, throw him out of the country as an undesirable alien. if they could prove he was committing serious crime in Spain.
Del que luego se ha sabido que era holandés y que puede llamarse Albertus.
Every time something went off down there, they used to come and knock at my door. There was a case where a Canadian guy was shot in the head and they set light to the car and burned him up like a bit of pork, crispy pork. They got me up there on a Sunday morning showing me photographs of him saying, do you know this man and all, you know, you've been to his villa and stuff like that. It gave me a lot of aggravation all the time, you know, it never stopped.
Foreman had become the owner of the Eagles, a club near Marbella. It was a popular meeting place for British criminals and was under constant scrutiny from the Spanish police and the Spanish media.
En el Club Eagles, en la urbanización Aloha, se encuentra su lugar predilecto de descanso. Equipo de investigación se apostó a su puerta.
Eventually, Spanish TV woke up to the fact that there was a problem in those days of international crime on the Costa del Sol, and basically started harassing Freddie Foreman, which is about the most silliest thing you can possibly do.
Freddie Foreman es otro de sus amigos, su socio favorito.
When I went out the back exit and slipped away in somebody else's car, they followed me from there. And they boxed me in with a car in the front and a car at the back, and I couldn't get out, and they had the van on the side, and then out come the camera.
So he started giving it the old V signs and everything, which they thought was hilarious.
And that was being shown all the time out there on the news and stuff. My grandchildren were saying, look, Papa Fred. They were saying, I was only little, it's Papa Fred on the television.
And then the next thing they did, they went back to Eagles, where he was going to, parked up outside, and was stunned and amazed to find out that their people carrier was trashed. The Spaniards began to realise, shit, stay away from this guy.
In the summer of '89, the Spanish authorities decided to move against Senor Foreman. Unable to extradite him, and still without enough evidence to deport him, they took the law into their own hands.
As I walked out to the apartment, I went round by my motor car, and as I walked out, they jumped me. The police guard here jumped me.
The Spanish High Court later ruled the arrest and deportation of Freddie Foreman had been carried out illegally. But it would make no difference to him. He was on his way home. At this point, no one had told the British authorities what was going on. It was left to the press to tip them off.
I called the British police and said, look, Freddie Foreman's on his way back to the UK. I think you should get to Heathrow Airport because you're probably going to find him at the other end.
We had no knowledge of this up until that point at all, and so we had to pile into one of the flying squad vehicles and make very fast tracks for the airport.
They woke me up at Heathrow, and I just watched as the robbery squad come marching down the gangway.
To our delight, Mr. Foreman was escorted from that flight.
When I come out of the plane, there was all these banks of cameramen everywhere, you know, banks of them, like a film premiere it was. Of course, I came back and I was straight down the neck and taken to Brixton and charged with the robbery.
7 years after the Security Express robbery, an armed convoy arrives at the Old Bailey, bringing Frederick Foreman to trial.
The police didn't have enough evidence against Foreman to get a conviction for robbery. But he was found guilty of handling money from the robbery and was sentenced to 9 years in prison.
When Freddie was taken back, it was like a bit of a shock, running round the whole area. People said, "Well, hang on, it doesn't work anymore. It's not just all load of fun. You know, that you can be touched.
The first of the Security Express runaways had returned to Britain to face justice. Ronnie Knight was still living on the Costa and still wanted in connection with the Security Express robbery.
Hey, look, I told you to go and have piss-offs.
Knight was running out of money. He had invested heavily in the local property market, but had lost out when the market crashed. In 1990, he opened a club, R.J. Knight's, which he hoped would turn around his fortunes. But the allure of mixing with criminals had worn thin. The club acquired a reputation for fights and drug deals. It never became the money spinner Knight had hoped for.
In the end, if you haven't got the money, you can't pay the bills. If you can't pay the bills, paradise starts to fade somewhat. You can't go to the restaurants, you can't drive around in posh cars, you can't be seen to be entertaining. And that was hard for Ronnie because all his life he'd had a lot of money.
One of the few assets Knight still had was his story. Having once avoided the press at all costs, he now took part in a series of friendly articles and photo shoots with his wife, Sue. But behind the smiles, their marriage was coming apart. Whatever they were paid by the press, they no longer had enough money to support their lives in the sun.
The moment, that telling moment in his life came when halfway up a hill, as we were driving to his home, the vehicle just about carrying us finally put it out. It was I don't know, an aging 700cc Fiat Uno. And finally, and there we were, half up the hill, and Ronnie said, "What's happened to my life?" And that was the beginning of the end, really. That was the road that led to him coming back.
I just wanted to come home. I wanted to get away from it all, get it all over with. And I was told the publicity I have anyway, you'll never get sentenced, Ronnie. No matter what it is, you would never get sentenced with the publicity I have. So that's the chance I took anyway.
What have you missed about Britain?
My mother and my family, obviously. Food-wise, pies and mesh.
Barry Tracy had brokered the ultimate Costa del crime scoop. Ronnie Knight's return to Britain.
I got a phone call first thing in the morning, about 5 o'clock in the morning. He said, "You better get your bags back now."
Come on, let's go, come on.
He said, "Of course, it's got out to the press. And they're all on the planes coming over."
What did Sue think of this?
She had no say in it. She had no say in it. Don't stop, bastard. Oh, this is it there.
The last time Ronnie saw Sue was when she kissed him goodbye at Granada and wept copiously.
I suppose she was upset. Obviously I'm not with her now anyway, so maybe she was upset.
Bob created Runaway Ronnie, and now after a decade on the run, it was the press, not the police, that was bringing him back to justice. The Sun and Sky Television were paying £45,000 for exclusive rights to the story.
They said, "Come on, they have a job of this." They've got it.
Right this way, mate. 6 miles.
And charged me with a robbery.
Ronnie Knight thought he was so famous, no jury could hear his case without prejudice, and the charges against him would be dropped. When they weren't, he pleaded guilty to handling money from the robbery. He got a 7-year prison sentence.
When Ronnie Knight left, it was Sherwood Forest without Robin Hood, I suppose, and Little John might still be there, and some of the other minor characters, but what is for certain is that the crime still goes on. Workaday crimes carried out by nasty people who are not of the glamorous variety.
By the mid-90s, a new generation of violent criminals had arrived on the Costa del Sol from across Europe. The murder rate was spiraling as different gangs turned against each other. This was the real legacy of the British Costa crooks. They had established an international culture of crime that was now out of control.
You've got Eastern Europeans, you've got Kosovans, you've got Romanians, you've got Bulgarians, you've got the Russians. It's become an awful lot nastier. If you like, the Costa del crime has gone down market.
Although crime on the Costa has continued to escalate, it barely rates a mention in the British press anymore. It's yesterday's news.
The Costa del crime was a long-running saga, but in the end it played out. It's history. It's gone. It was an era that you couldn't pump life back into. And what's more, I think, since it was generated by the press per se, they wouldn't consider doing it again. It's tired, it's finished.
For nearly 20 years, the Costa del crime has been part of our folklore. It sums up an era when to be on the run in Spain was made to seem wonderfully exotic and glamorous.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.